Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to your Wednesday edition of Let's Talk Tropics here on this October the 9th. We've got a big hurricane out in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to be making landfall a little bit later on tonight. And it looks like we just got some new updates here when it comes to the coordinates. So I'm going to try to update that while I'm sitting here talking just a little bit. But major Hurricane Milton continues to stay there over parts of the Gulf of Mexico, and it's now getting within maybe about 160 miles or so of the coast of Florida. And we do think there's going to be a landfall here coming up here a little bit later on this evening. And if I can get the rest of these, the information, looks like our wind speeds have stayed at 145 miles per hour, but just kind of getting a little bit of an update here on the coordinates on the left-hand side of the screen. And the reason why I'm doing that real quick here is because they don't update the graphics from the National Hurricane Center. So just to make sure that I get the right information here when it comes to the latest stuff. I was really hoping that was going to update here right before we got on the show, but it just updated. So the numbers that you see there on the left are your current numbers right now. So if you see any discrepancies on some of the other graphics, that is the reason why. We're now getting hourly updates from the National Hurricane Center, generally position, winds, and pressure and the distance away from certain cities. So right now, Hurricane Milton is 145 miles west of Fort Myers and 160 miles to the southwest of Tampa. So got a few more hours here before this is going to make landfall later on. Let's take care of a couple of particulars here first. 81, gorgeous day here in Lafayette. Winds are out of the north at 12. We've got crystal clear blue skies and nice low humidity, and we can see that on all the traffic cams here this afternoon. Everything looking just fine. East and westbound on the I-10 corridor and just about everywhere else you go here in Acadiana. So here's a look at our satellite picture, and of course you can see most of the country is experiencing very tranquil weather, but we've got that hurricane that's down in the Gulf of Mexico and a deep trough that has been digging here, rather not quite that far, but a deep trough that's been digging here across parts of the eastern half of the country, and that's going to continue to help to push Milton a little bit farther off toward the northeast. A lot of folks were looking at this earlier this morning saying, wow, it's really way to the far south. How's it going to make that turn? Well, when the trough starts to dig a little bit deeper and we're starting to get a little more wind shear affecting the western side of it. So for one, it's pretty much going on track about where the forecast track has been for quite some time, but now it's starting to be impacted by some of that southwesterly wind shear on the west. And in fact, the structure of the hurricane is not nearly as nice as it was yesterday, where you have that perfect symmetry, you have that eye wall that was very, very visible. And we're not seeing that right now. We're starting to see a little bit more of that wind shear kind of affecting the southwest side here of the hurricane, kind of pulling in like that. So it's blowing some of the tops off the thunderstorms here on the western side. And even looking at some of the recon data, it looks like that the southwestern eye wall might actually be open and exposed right now. So that would be an indication of some weakening. And you can see it's picked up its forward speed, but I think it's about as fast as it's going to go now, and it is going to be hovering at about 15 to 16 miles per hour forward speed from here on out until landfall. And then once it starts to get on the other side of Florida, I do think we're going to see it pick up speed once again as it pushes out into the Atlantic Ocean. And there is that 90-minute, 1-minute update. So each one of these frames is 1 minute. It's high resolution. And yesterday when we were looking at this, you could see clearly the eye wall that was there. And at this point in time, you're now able to see some of that drier air and that wind shear kind of taking the effect here on this western side of the system. So the symmetry isn't quite as good as it was yesterday. So that is an indication that shear's having an effect on it, and we'll also probably see some weakening. If it doesn't weaken, it's probably not going to strengthen anymore unless it finds some kind of warm eddy right there off the coast of Florida, or we get some good wraparound and maybe an eye wall replacement cycle type of situation. But I really think 145 or lower is what we're going to be looking at when it gets to landfall. Check this out. This is the radar coming out of Fort Myers, and you can really clearly see the eye wall. But one of the things I want to point out is you really start to get a lot of this very heavy rain that kind of trains over the same areas. And also at the same time in the offshore waters, now that we're getting that southerly flow to come in, the waters are starting to push in to some of the bays here, Tampa Bay as well as Charlotte Harbor that's here down to the south. And then as you get down toward Marco Island in the southern parts of Florida, you got that strong onshore flow. So already the water is starting to pile up. It's not the storm surge yet, but as those winds continue to pull in out of the south, we're going to continue to see that water just kind of piling right up against the coast. So the coastal flooding is going to start here in the next several hours. And then, of course, the eye of the hurricane is forecast to make its way up just to the south of Tampa, St. Pete. So right now the forecast is bringing it on shore here closer to Sarasota, which would be a little bit better for Tampa with more of an offshore flow on the northern side of that eye, with more of the onshore flow here on the southern side of the eye. So from Sarasota southward going down into Cape Coral and down toward Fort Myers, Inglewood Beach is another area that's down there. We're probably going to be seeing the storm surge flooding coming up. And I've got a couple of webcams that I'm going to show you here in just a little bit. So again, there is the track. That isn't going to change a whole lot. Notice that the hurricane warnings extend north and south of where the cone is. The cone is just basically the margin of error. About 2/3 of all tropical systems that are tracked by the National Hurricane Center will stay within the cone, but 1/3 of them go either on the left or the right or top or bottom, depending on which direction the system is going. So there is a little margin of error. So it could still slide northward and head into Tampa Bay, or it could also slide a little bit farther southward, in fact, areas closer to Fort Myers. Now, the intensity forecast is really interesting because we're right now getting probably within 12 hours of where we're going to see a landfall. So that is all of these numbers right in here. Everything above that is pretty much category 3. You still got one straggler that's keeping it at category 5, but this is going to be a high-end category 3 or a low-end category 4. And I think the guesses on those knots for the forecast at 115 to 120 is probably going to be about what we're going to see when this makes landfall. And also depending on the size of the eye, got some questions if a tropical storm or a hurricane were to come into Vermilion Bay that was like this, would we be talking about the same kind of storm surge? Well, absolutely we would, but there's a lot of variables too. Remember the other day when Hurricane Milton winds were 180 miles per hour? It was a tiny hurricane. The eye of the hurricane was only about 10 miles wide. And we saw that similar situation with Hurricane Charlie, I think which was in 2004, that hit southwest Florida. It was an incredible category 4 hurricane, but it was such a small hurricane, it really didn't produce a whole lot of storm surge. But the bigger that eye is, the more you're going to see that storm surge. And in this case, I think we're still going to be seeing storm surge values just south of Tampa Bay that could easily go over 10, maybe up to 15 feet. So Anna Maria Island is one of those areas there, and then pushing down just to the north of Charlotte Harbor is where you're going to see the maximum storm surge up to 15 feet. Now remember, that's 15 feet above ground level. That doesn't count the waves that are produced by the wind on top of that. And I went to a school last week, and it was a bunch of third graders, and we kind of talked about how strong the water is. And I just told them, you know, you ever picked up a gallon of water, just a gallon jug of water? Well, that weighs about 8.5 pounds. Imagine thousands and thousands and thousands of these gallons of water falling on you and how heavy that is and what that's going to do when it hits buildings and infrastructure and different things like that. You tend not to think of how heavy the water is, but if you've been to the beach and you've gotten smacked by a wave that you weren't paying attention to, it really hurts and it knocks you off your feet. And that's nothing compared to what we're going to be seeing when it comes to storm surge values. So storm surge is going to not just affect those areas right near where the eye is going to be coming in, all the way down into southern Florida, even there getting down into the southwestern corner there, 3 to 5 foot. And then once it moves across, you're going to get that that flow that's going to come this way on the northern side of the hurricane. So you have storm surge issues that are going to be coming in even on the Atlantic coast of Florida. So this is going to be a statewide thing, and maybe even multi-state, where you're going to have some storm surge issues there into portions of Georgia and South Carolina. Now, I don't think we're going to be seeing issues in the mountain areas of Georgia and western North and South Carolina. This is going to be a coastal situation. So areas that got hit very, very hard by Hurricane Helene just under 2 weeks ago, especially in those far inland areas, are not going to be having issues with this particular hurricane, not like what they saw the last time around. Notice how the rain is really going to be concentrated here over central portions of Florida, and you're still going to be talking about 8, perhaps up to 16 inches of rain. But remember, because you've got the rivers that are trying to flow back toward either the Gulf of Mexico or over here toward the Atlantic Ocean, we're going to have that storm surge issue. So as the waters are pushing inland here, the rivers can't drain out into the Gulf, or on the opposite side, you would say on the Atlantic Ocean either. So you're going to be seeing tremendous amounts of rain, 8 to 16 inches, and this is only in 2 days. So that's a lot of rain anyway in 2 days. They do have pretty good infrastructure to be able to drain water in south and central Florida, but if you've got storm surge that's pushing water inland in some of these bays and gulfs there that you've got these rivers that are flowing into, the water just can't escape because it's actually running backwards. And we've seen that in cases here in South Louisiana as well. Wind speeds are going to be up in that Category 4 range right around the center of circulation, but most of central and southern Florida will experience tropical storm force winds, and that's not just on the west coast, that's on the east coast of Florida as well. This is going to be going over a high population area over central Florida. You got to think, not only do you have areas like Tampa, St. Pete, and then getting down to around Sarasota and then down into Fort Myers and Port Charlotte. But you've also got Lakeland and Orlando, and then areas along the East Coast from Cocoa Beach going up to Cape Canaveral and pushing up to around Daytona. That's a very high population area, that central Florida region. And the Interstate 4 corridor is very, very populated. So a lot of folks have moved out of the way. And most of them running from the water but hiding from the wind, but a lot of folks in central Florida are going to be dealing with that high wind, so that's why we've got hurricane warnings for the inland counties as well. Not too much going on here in Tampa right now. That's the live cam. And you can see there's a little movement on some of the trees there, but you move down towards Siesta Key, and Siesta Key is just a little bit south of Sarasota, and camera is probably facing toward the southwest, so it is facing where Hurricane Milton is coming from, and you can see that you're getting those tremendous amounts of rain that are starting to come in. Now, again, that is not the whole hurricane yet. That's just some of these heavy rains that are starting to pull in from the wraparound bands that are there, and those can be fairly efficient rain producers too, but you'll also notice that you're starting to see the water starting to come in. So more of a higher tide, and then on top of that, you've got the water that's pushing inland as well. So you're going to see some coastal flooding. This is not the storm surge yet. This is just the water that continues to pile on up. And I'm going to kind of let it go off toward the left here again as it goes back and forth. But you can see that water is covering much of the beach. You can still see the waves crashing farther out. And this is a fairly large beach, but the waters are coming in and they're going to slowly elevate over the next several hours. Various cams. Now this looks like pink shell. I'm not exactly sure where this is, but this is coming from the Associated Press. We've had different camera views and it changes from time to time. Earlier it was on Tampa, but you can see those palm trees swaying there in the wind as you've got those stronger winds, and that storm surge is going to be coming in. And then farther down to the south, Fort Myers, we're already starting to see the water come up a little bit more. And I do think that these areas that are right there at the bottom of the screen, we're probably going to be seeing that water starting to come up. It's already starting to come up a little bit more there right along the coast. That pier looks like it's pretty much underwater at this point, but we're going to see more water flowing inland there for parts of Fort Myers and then going on down toward the south as well. So as we continue to look at some of the different models, we're going to start here with the HWRF, and this one is pointing to a landfall just south of Tampa Bay and then crossing over and still maintaining hurricane strength. Once it moves out into the Atlantic Ocean, going to go ahead and stop it here for that landfalling period. And if this particular model here is calling for 101 knot winds, so that's 116, 117 mile per hour winds. But notice this is about the time that it's already on land, and it has it pushing inland right there on that southern coast of Tampa Bay. So the worst is going to be coming in there to around Sarasota. Some of those cameras that I showed you there, when you get that onshore flow, it really starts to push the waters up. So down toward Port Charlotte into Fort Myers as well. And everything that's in purple there are hurricane force winds. So hurricane force winds are going to be concentrated there right around the center of circulation. The HAFS model is very similar, a little bit farther to the south than the HWRF, and it looks like it's a little bit closer to what we're seeing with the official National National Hurricane Center's forecast. And this is taking it the frame just offshore. So this would be 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock Eastern time, where it's still just offshore, but again, just to the south of Sarasota. So this is a little bit farther to the south than the HWRF. The HWRF had a landfall right about here, and the HAF's a little bit farther toward the south. Now it does look like the wind speed's 89.3 and your pressure 958. So you're seeing a little bit less intense when it comes to the HAFS model. So still a formidable hurricane as it continues to move off toward the northeast. Now here's the HMON. And again, I'm only going to focus on these hurricane-specific models this time around, but you can see it cruises all the way across Florida and then it back into the Atlantic Ocean as a hurricane. And with this particular graphic here, the HMON seems to be a little bit stronger, but remember, this is about 7, 8 o'clock this evening, so it's a little farther offshore. It's still forecast to come into that southern part of Tampa Bay over to around Sarasota. And remember, even a wiggle of 10 or 15 miles in either direction is going to make a big difference, whether it's good or bad for you. But the hurricane force winds will already be moving onshore, and this is going with 116 on the wind speed, so you're talking about maybe 130-ish. So that would be Category 4 status. So most of our models are high-end Category 3, low-end Category 4. There's not a whole lot of difference where it comes to the landfall. It's either going to be in Pinellas County or it's going to be into Manatee County down to the south of Tampa Bay. So anywhere from around Clearwater getting down to probably around south side of Sarasota. But we will sometimes see wiggles in either direction. So I know a lot of folks in Port Charlotte that got hit by Hurricane Charlie back in the day when really all the forecast models were focusing more on Tampa, but it ended up going on the right-hand side of that cone and coming up through Port Charlotte, and they were devastated by a Category 4 hurricane. Real quick look at the GFS. It also comes onshore just south of Tampa Bay, and the Euro model comes onshore right at the southern tip of Pinellas County, which is that little peninsula that sticks out on the western side of Tampa Bay. So everything for track is concentrated generally in the same place, but again, any wiggle of about 5, 10, or even 15 miles can make a big difference. So hopefully everybody who lives in these areas have heeded the warnings and the evacuations as well, because you don't really want to gamble with a hurricane like Milton. Now, wind shear we talked about a little bit earlier. The wind shear is now having an effect on the hurricane, and that is something that was expected. You see the southwesterly shear starting to come in, and that's why you're seeing the back and the southwestern side of the hurricane kind of opening up a little bit as you get that strong vertical wind shear to come in. It's not a good friend to tropical systems, and it does tend to shear things apart, and that's why we're seeing a little bit of weakening, and we're going to continue to get those hourly updates from the National Hurricane Center, and hopefully we can get this to weaken just a little bit more. But 145 is still a good bet. I think anything over 130 is probably going to be a good bet when it comes to a landfalling hurricane. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack there when it comes to Hurricane Milton, but this is still Let's Talk Tropics, so we have to talk about some of the other stuff that's out there. Believe it or not, Tropical Storm Leslie regained strength and is now a hurricane once again, so we do have 2 hurricanes out there. There's a low pressure area northeast of the Bahamas. It's got a medium chance for development, and then off to the east, off the African coast, a wave is expected to roll off in the next couple of days and might have a lower chance for development. And there's kind of a look at what we're looking at there. You got that wave coming off the African coast. Leslie, of course, there in the middle part of the Atlantic. And then that little area north of the Bahamas might have a bit of a chance. And looking even farther into the future, remember we look at this global tropical hazards outlook that comes down on Tuesdays, but unfortunately it comes down after we do Let's Talk Tropics. So this is the brand new one, and we talked about the possibility of some new development again over the western part of the Caribbean going into the week of the 16th. And unfortunately, this global tropical hazards outlook still has the Western Caribbean somewhat active going into the last week of October. Remember, hurricane season doesn't end until November the 30th, and I wanted to point out that there still is the possibility going into the following week that we could have a new system try to develop here over the western part of the Caribbean. Now, this is for Friday, October 18th, so this is a week from Friday, and I have seen some solutions put on social media. There's been about maybe 7 or 8 runs that have shown something trying to develop here, but I've seen stuff going out to the west. I've seen something going here. Even one model was coming up toward Louisiana. So it's all over the place at this point where this thing could possibly go. So we don't want to really kind of buy in on one particular model, but there's a pretty good chance that we might see some new development there over the western part of the Caribbean coming up the following week. Let's hope that this stays away, or in fact, it would be even better if we don't see anything develop at all. But there is a chance that we could see more activity, and because we are in October, even though things do tend to slow down, it's been very, very busy this month, and we're only about, let's say, about halfway through the month of October here, and you can see that even as we get into the end of the month, last part of October, we still have about the same amount of activity as we would see during the early part of August. So hurricane season continues to go on, and usually we don't have a whole lot to worry about here in Louisiana once we get out of October, but the Caribbean and the far western Atlantic still tends to see some activity even during the month of November, and even really during in 2005's hurricane season, we had something develop into December, and I'm pretty sure it rolled over into the following calendar year into January too. So hurricane season normally would kind of shut down by the end of November, but so far this has been kind of an unusual hurricane season, so not a good time to let your guard down just yet. So that's what I've got for you here on a Wednesday. I know it's a whole lot. I hope you enjoy these discussions we have here on Let's Talk Tropics. If you do, please like the video and subscribe to my channel and turn on those notifications. And of course, between any broadcasts, I will update the latest coordinates and wind speeds when it comes to Hurricane Milton or anything else that might try to develop on my social media pages, both on Facebook and X. Get out and enjoy this beautiful day. Be thankful that we have got such a pretty day, and really send our best over to our friends over in Florida over the next several hours, and we'll be watching those webcams throughout the afternoon and evening. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. I'll see you tomorrow morning for Acadiana Weather Today at 7:30. See you then.